Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, it's and Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
I've got Roberto Blake on the show today, and it's such a pleasure because I feel like so much of the Yang Gang movement was around producing content, grassroots content from a variety of supporters. And you are one of the experts on content generation. You're not new to this game.
No,
maybe
not at all.
for those who aren't familiar with you, maybe just start with a quick intro to who is Roberto Blake.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that super great info, Tom. Intro, why'd I say info? Because I'm about to go to info dump, that's why. Anyway, my name is Roberto Blake. I'm a creative entrepreneur. I came from a background in graphic and web design and traditional marketing. I worked in corporate America, making a lot of other people money, and then decided to do it myself. And ultimately, I found myself on YouTube back when I was a full-time freelancer, trying to help really educate people how to transition in their creative careers. Found myself becoming a social media consultant, kind of on the back of the job that I had done in corporate America, working in web hosting. And then, of course, I became a YouTube certified educator and started helping content creators reach their goals, whether it was building a full-time income around creativity, transitioning out of their 9-to-5, or growing significant audiences and helping many people achieve the coveted silver play button level, helped a few creators reach gold. I myself have 442,000 subscribers, I think, something like that. And been doing YouTube for a while, maybe I think 7 years coming up this summer, 1,400 plus videos on the main channel. And I've started a couple new interesting projects. So yeah, I've been in the content game for a minute.
That's a lot of uploads, man. Kudos for that kind of staying power. You know, there's a lot of people that kind of come and go, but you stuck around and grown. I mean, tell us a little bit about when you first came across Yang and the Yang Gang and what your impression was.
So actually, I read Andrew Yang's book, Smart People Should Build Things, before I ever read The War on Normal People, believe it or not. And then a friend recommended The War on Normal People at some point, and I realized that I'd had it on my bookshelf because I'd bought it after reading Smart People Should Build Things, and I just had never gotten to it in my reading list. I read, in terms of physical books, I read a physical book about once a week, once every other week. I run through 1 to 2 audiobooks a week, so I'm a very active reader, always have been. And then when I was doing something with a friend of mine, Stephanie, at the YouTube space, I want to say maybe almost 2 years ago, she was telling me about Andrew Yang as a presidential candidate, and I was like, why have I heard that name before? And then I was like, has he written anything? And then she went through, and I was like, oh, I read Smart People Should Build Things. And so then I picked up into The War on Normal People, and then I became very fascinated with him. I then went and saw that he had these TED Talks and so on and so forth. And Yang ended up becoming my guy.
Yeah. Was that a hard call? Who was it down between?
I liked the spirit of Beto O'Rourke, but I believed him to be a good man. But I didn't agree with a lot of his things on policies, and there weren't a lot of things that I think truly moved the country forward and addressed the issues of one of my stances, Tom, and I think you'll appreciate this. I read the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov when I was young, and it was like one of the big things in science fiction for me. I read I, Robot. I really believe in the not only in technology, but the importance of literally advancing civilization and the advancement of the human race. I've thought very hard about where humanity has gone in the leaps and bounds we've made in the last 100 years. And then I keep thinking about the projections of the next 100 years. And there's some things that won't happen soon enough to solve these problems at scale for humanity as a whole. And there are only so many innovative thinkers that I really believe are looking at maybe the top 25 existential threats to humanity. And then when I came across Andrew Yang as a candidate, I realized that he doesn't have ego or avarice, and he's at the forefront a humanist and somebody who's really thinking thoughtfully about our future. And that's where it became a no-brainer for me, because I'm a nerd.
Yeah. Well, I remember, I think I was following you on Twitter even before Yang, just because of your YouTube kind of commentary and stuff like that about like being a content creator. And then when I saw you, I think you might have tweeted about Yang or something. I was like, oh, that's sweet. Roberto's in the gang.
Yeah.
Have you made video content, or have you tried to keep sort of your content strategy stuff separate from your political views?
I've kept it from that because I genuinely feel that I've been mostly apolitical for a long time in my life, even though I vote, and I consider myself, even though it's a very unpopular camp to be in, I consider myself a moderate or even a centrist, or I like the phrase you came up with, closet libertarian, like in the sense that it's like I don't go for the more outlandish and crazy and taxation is theft rhetoric of people who identify as libertarians. That's where I really have a hard time finding any type of, I've never really believed in identities for the most part. I've always been somebody who's been very individualistic. And so the thing is, there's not really a political identity for me because I'm not ideologically driven. In fact, I realize that in human culture and entomology, we gravitate toward tribalism, but it really hasn't served people, I think, like me, growing up as a nerd to like in being an outlier and always being very much not necessarily the norm. So being somebody who is nonconformist and being somebody who is very individualistic has a lot of downsides, and one of them is that you don't really fit within the conventions of the political spectrum when it comes to identity politics, and thus no one really markets and messages for us. I think Yang was the exception there of people who would typically be apolitical, and that's where I think he was able to activate. And I think if he had more momentum, he would have had a broader coalition than people realize, because he just didn't have the scale to reach the people that he could activate. And also people are not looking at activation, Tom. They're looking at doubling down on the tribalism that is easy for them to market to in the groups that they already have. It's not unlike YouTube, where a lot of people are tempted to just triple down on a base they already have rather than think about new acquisition or dealing with churn. So I think of it in that way, that Yang was going to dominate a market no one was competing for, and that got undermined by the lack of scale and attention given to him, because to a point someone's making in the live comments, he didn't have the name recognition. And there's a strategic issue with the barrier to entry in the political arena for somebody who doesn't have name recognition, but then also doesn't have pre-existing media relationships or media clout. And I think that when you look at the viability of, say, someone like Donald Trump, he had a pre-existing brand in the American lexicon to be a household name, and that was an advantage. You can't run somebody against him very easily without bringing that to bear, because you are at a severe disadvantage just off of name recognition alone, because in human behavior and sociology, familiar good, unfamiliar bad. Familiar good, stranger bad. That is literally how human beings operate. It's why the largest brands in the world remain the largest brands in the world.
Yeah, and that's why we end up with Trump v. Biden, I guess.
It is, but the thing is, it's not even a worst case scenario. I know that a lot of people feel differently, but from a strategic point of view, you could look at him as something to be used on a chessboard. In the analogy, I would say that he represents a rook. It's not always the strongest piece, but it could be used very aggressively if done correctly, or it could be used defensively to set you up for a longer term strategy. My thought was, because out of all of the people who could have been the nominee, Andrew has a amenable friendship and relationship with Joe Biden, which means that there would have been resources that theoretically, I don't necessarily believe Biden will win, by the way, but I do think that people should not be ideological as well versus strategic in this situation, especially if their goal is to reduce or eliminate human suffering, which I believe, as somebody who is very, likes Isaac Asimov and the Foundation series, I believe that the goal of any meaningful public servant should be to eliminate human suffering to the extent that they're capable of, with their ideas and their implementation. I don't think that Donald Trump is a great candidate for that, and I don't necessarily believe Joe Biden's a great candidate for that in terms of implementation. But if I have to think about who is more likely, or who I believe to be more sincere in the desire to truly be of public service or to be of help to people, I obviously think that Joe Biden is probably a nicer person than Donald Trump. I think he has a track record of where you could say there's a lot there that is likable as a person, and I think that's what Andrew has seen in him. But I also think their friendship and the fact that he's someone who will at least open a channel or a conversation, and the fact he's made overtures to, hey, you would be part of my administration in some capacity, is strategic leverage in which capital could be diverted or could be pushed behind more UBI pilots. Just because Biden doesn't necessarily embrace or believe in UBI doesn't mean that he would not help Andrew to test his ideas because of that friendship and that relationship. People work with people they like, and people help people they like, even if they don't agree with them sometimes. And therefore, we could eliminate a lot more human suffering if Joe Biden is able to lend any type of political capital or support to Andrew Yang or make proper introductions for him. I believe that's the capacity they served with President Obama, and that was why he was the pick of his head, so to speak, rather than the pick of his heart. He's made that comment. I think it was a strategic play where Biden has established relationships, political capital, and resources that can be put toward a goal. And I think that ignoring that reality based on an ideological preference ignores the point that governance is about winning at the end of the day.
And speaking of winning, what do you think will be the critical factors for Biden v. Trump? What do you think it's going to come down to?
Donald Trump has a firm coalition without an alternative for those people, dissatisfied or not. There's something we said with going with the devil you know. He is a master marketer and a master manipulator of media, and he has momentum behind his base, even current circumstances notwithstanding. And he's very good at activating them emotionally. People are not passionate and emotional about Joe Biden, and unfortunately most people aren't practical and strategic, as we saw in the 2016 election as well, and so they're going to ignore the ramifications of more Supreme Court appointments, more federal appointments, and even just the gross negligence and mismanagement of the current crisis, both economically and the healthcare part of the crisis, in favor of the fact of sending a message that will ultimately fall on deaf ears, in my opinion. And so, as Emperor Palpatine would say, your pitiful rebellion, your feeble rebellion, this would be the last word in the story of rebellion. That's what Emperor Palpatine would say about it, is that in this situation, people would rather yell, scream, and stomp their feet than do whatever it takes to say, let's walk back from the cliff of having someone who left our country unprepared, unequipped, and unprotected from a crisis. Let's walk back from the cliff of that and the potential tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that will suffer under, that kind of negligent leadership. Let's not let's stomp our feet and yell and scream instead of walking back from the cliff of Supreme Court appointments that we're going to have to live with for possibly 30 to 40 years on average. Yeah, let's go ahead and forget all of the practical reality of what people will have to deal with for decades to come, because we want to try to scream and yell to people who aren't going to listen.
So in a world where you've got Trump with this strong base that you refer to
versus a fragmented, non-existent coalition within the Democrat Party.
Right. So if you're Biden, what do you think? What's the game plan? How's he going to pull this one over?
The thing is, you'd have to find a way to, well, one, if I'm Biden, it's a conflict, because you see, the only thing that actually can work is if somehow Trump exacerbates the problems that we currently have to the point of people going, you know what, I don't even care what change looks like. I just need anything but this, which is the point at which people voted for Donald Trump in the first place, which means that if you're Biden, you're conflicted between your moral obligation to not want people to suffer versus, the worse things get, the better it is for me to be electable. Because there's a point at which human beings get to a point of frustration to where, and a friend of mine who is a veteran, he is retired military, he told me that it's like when you're getting hit, you move anywhere you possibly can. The possibility exists that it's worse, but you already know how bad it is here, so you just go. And I was like, that's interesting. That's a very interesting mechanic, because that's the fight or flight response that human beings have. So psychologically, that makes total sense to me. Behavioral wise, that makes total sense to me. And I think that there's a line, I don't know where that line exists, to where people will just be, you know what, anything's better than what I currently have. And that's actually the line that people got to where they elected Donald Trump, even if they didn't like him. They felt that voting for Hillary Clinton was voting for more of the same. I don't know if the last 4 years have been traumatic enough for people to make a different choice, even though Joe Biden would represent the status quo or the establishment. I know people are very passionate about being anti-establishment. I would caution people that faith nor feelings are facts nor a method for finding them. And that's why I really appreciate what you do, Tom, with just breaking things down into data and analysis. But I also like to look at what people will typically do based on group behavior.
Yeah. So if I had to summarize it, the game plan for Biden is to hope that things get so bad that people just say, well, I want something else. Is there anything about Biden?
Well, you could also run ads like the one he recently ran that that Fred the Felon and Truckers for Yang recently commented on, where he actually, the Biden campaign, which probably had the Bloomberg ad engine behind it at this point, ran a very scathing editorial ad about Trump's handling of the crisis, and weaponized his own sound clips against him and contrast that against Joe Biden. And say what you will about Biden, but I think that all things considered, if we imagine, only this scenario, if Joe Biden was president, given what he said in his track record, we probably would have had a much more reasoned response to this situation than we have, because I can't imagine him cutting funding to the CDC. Can you?
Unlikely. Yeah, so unlikely.
I think that I think it's unlikely that Biden would have cut resources to a lot of very important things that we need to look at, like the CDC, like the EPA, things that help prepare us for disasters, and say what you will about him on policy or not being progressive enough. But the thing is, Trump's not progressive enough either. What's the plan here? What's the plan here? I can't push Biden left, so I'm going to go with Trump and I'm going to go with the far right.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate how frustrated a lot of progressives are, because I think they feel like, wow, yet again, in their opinion, their voice has not been heard. They would argue that HRC was a centrist kind of corporate Democrat, and Biden
who proposed, by the way, a retirement age of 50.
Yeah.
but Biden's
But she
is
was
60, so it's like, okay, we've gone downhill from here. It's like, oh, like, if you thought like, oh, that was unreasonable then, it's like, look at where we're moved to now.
yeah. I'm struck by how passionate those Bernie supporters are, though. I mean, they are really, really passionate.
Passion is powerful, but it has to be aligned. As someone I'm very fond of would say, Gary Vaynerchuk, an entrepreneur and great marketer and great human being, talks constantly about the importance of aligning passion to practicality and to purpose. And I think that from a practical standpoint, you have to ask yourself, if you're progressive, like, are you more ideologically driven by those things and those things that you want, or are you more purpose driven in the values of you really want people? And do you want, I have to ask progressives this because I've actually have friends who are both on the right, on the left, and in the center, and I ask is like, it's like, do you want the world to be better for people like you, or everybody, even the people you dislike and that disagree with you? And see, because I want to walk people back from the cliff of ideology, because the thing is, ideology becomes about beating the other person. And in my opinion, progressivism was supposed to be about the idea of producing more opportunity for everybody and helping everybody that we possibly can, and that these are problems that we want to solve. And I've seen more progressives take the bait of attacking people instead of problems. And I've seen that very strongly in certain camps. And I'll just say it, in the Bernie camp, I've seen people easily go down that road in the same way that many MAGA people go down that road. You, Tom, have expressed constantly how you see it in your own family, and that they attack people instead of problems.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to vote for Biden. I'm going to donate to him. I'm going to try and volunteer, primarily because I really feel like President Trump is not the right person for that job.
I think it's not a stretch to say that given the current crisis, that if we experience any bigger problems or exacerbations of problems of that scale, Tom, that you could consider him an existential threat to the stability, security, and sovereignty of the United States of America and its leadership in the world as a global economic power. We've already forfeited much of our moral authority to influence world leaders and dictators under a Trump regime based on things that have been done in rhetoric, if nothing else, because we're looked to and we're mocked for that very openly now. And in terms of the idea of America first, he hasn't done much to advance the American cause and America's standing in the world over the last 4 years from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, it's interesting in that you and I are a bit sort of, we're not easy to pigeonhole into one particular category. I kind of feel a little bit of empathy for Trump in that I sense that he also feels like he's not respected and understood. And he's always trying to...
him. In many ways, I feel bad for him.
Yeah, right? Like he takes things so personally. And I generally think that comes from a place of great pain and hurt, and
he has a deep-seated insecurity. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't understand. Donald Trump was the fourth born son of Fred Trump, who actually built his own business empire alongside his father Friedrich, who was a self-made man. So Fred had a great mentor in his father Friedrich, an immigrant, by the way, who was also a fourth son, left from a small village in Germany, didn't speak English when he came to America, swept up like hair in a barber shop. Like, Friedrich Trump has an interesting story, and was a very opportunistic, very wild west, quite literally frontiersman type guy who turned every disaster into an opportunity to advance himself and to find a way to contribute some kind of value. And that was how Donald Trump's grandfather operated. His son and him built the empire that Donald would inherit together. Donald Trump, from the time he was 8 years old, already was a millionaire. There was nothing really left to build except for a name and a brand and reputation. And to Trump's credit, he's a great media mogul and titan there, but he's never really built anything, Tom. He's never built anything with his own two hands from scratch, not the way his father and his grandfather did. To be in the shadows of them and to stand on the shoulders of giants is a very difficult thing to do. And a lot of people don't sympathize with that because of the fact that he is a multimillionaire and an alleged billionaire. But that being said, to have a very aggressive father who's already built and laid out a roadmap for success for you, and to not really have anything to do but to build on what he has accomplished, and the only thing you can do is kind of basically pad the numbers at that point. He's more of a manager than an entrepreneur, and not always a really good steward of the empire. There have been plenty of analysts who have said that basically if he had left his inheritance in the bank for the majority of his lifetime, he would be 5 to 6 times more wealthy than the way he actually operated. So it's debatable how good his business acumen is. I mean, he's made more money than us, but he also started with a considerable advantage when you literally are worth tens of millions of dollars from the time you're in grade school. So there's something to be said for that. I mean, but where I sympathize for him is he's a man out of his depth. He's dealing with problems at a scale that he's not equipped for, has not been groomed for, is not prepared for. He was somebody who was groomed to sit over a real estate empire. He was someone who was groomed to sit over and move around money that was already built for him. He was not made to tackle the problems of the world. He was not made to manage a $21 trillion economy. He was not groomed to lead the strongest and largest military in the world. And nor did he do his diligence in preparation for that. He decided to become a world leader on a whim, probably from a place of insecurity and being insulted and feeling like he needed to prove something to somebody. And that's a very terrible situation for us to find ourselves in. Criticize Joe Biden, HRC all you want. They dedicated their life to public servants and they came from the working class. And even if they are disconnected in that somewhat by years, I would say, of the compound interest of what they've done over a lifetime, I think it's no different than somebody's grandparents being disconnected from their grandchildren. But I don't necessarily think that we can look at them honestly and the spectrum of like what is a malicious person and find them truly comparable to Donald Trump. That's one man's point of view, though.
Yeah, no, I do notice that I had lunch this summer in New York with some folks in the real estate development area, and we were in Manhattan, and they've done really well. But I could definitely get the sense that when we talked about Trump, there was this impression like, well, he's from Queens. He's not really like a serious developer.
He's always had a chip on his shoulder about that.
Yeah.
They've never let him forget he's not from Manhattan.
And
I'm from Brooklyn, so that's a thing, by the way. I'm in Atlanta right now, but I was born in Brooklyn. Like the 5 boroughs, that's a whole culture. Like that's a thing.
Yeah. And so, you see it. You see it when he's like always talking about how he graduated from Wharton. Like he's always trying to show that he belongs. And I feel like even after becoming president, he has not been embraced by Merkel or any of the major world power leaders. He ironically seems to get along better with Kim Jong-un, and
he gets along with the autocrats. He gets along with after all this stuff about being tough on China, he gets along with Xi. He gets along with Kim Jong-un. He gets along with Vladimir Putin, and that's because they are also people who are insecure and have a chip on their shoulder. And you can see it in their behavior and the way that they react to criticism, Tom. You can see it in the way that they react to criticism. Barack Obama, by far, reacted to an absurd amount of criticism far better, publicly and otherwise, than Donald Trump. And he never attacked right-wing media the way that Donald Trump is. Everything we used to hear about Emperor Obama, I almost wish Emperor Obama is like Dark Lord of the Sith. Like, no, that would have actually been very interesting if he had pulled out the red lightsaber and went to town and held a lot of people to account, It's like I would have really loved to see him kind of verbally body slam whichever person it was who called Michelle like an ape in heels was the rhetoric. I think it's like the amount of rhetoric, the amount of lack of decorum, the lack of accountability for these things, for all the criticism of John McCain. The thing is, part of the reason he couldn't galvanize the base when he ran against Barack Obama is he would not play in to the worst instincts, and he wouldn't throw out the red meat, and he would try to hold people to a standard of civility and respectability. And in this president, we don't have somebody who has ever acted in a manner his entire lifetime, and we have him as a media mogul and a celebrity and what do they call it, a diva. We've seen him his whole life. His whole life has been documented on film for us to view, and you can look at the nature and the character of the man. He's always been thin-skinned. He's always had a lack of civility when pressed. He's never handled anything gracefully whenever attacked. And by comparison, look at President Obama, a gold standard possibly for grace under pressure, working with people you disagreement, and setting aside very scathing, racial epithets toward him, overlooking personal attacks on him and his family, his daughters even. And if you compare that in the spectrum of how Donald Trump operates under criticism, it's almost an embarrassment to say that we have someone as a leader that just isn't a little bit more thick-skinned than that. In a way, I feel that it makes Americans look soft. I want to be represented by a much more stoic leader, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. I mean, I worry, like, with the leadership right now around the COVID-19 recovery, it seems like it's very hard for him to separate kind of accountability for results and who's at fault from, well, what do we need to do now going forward?
The word fault is wrong. It's the word responsibility. And he doesn't want to take any for anything bad, and only wants to take responsibility for something good, even if he wasn't the genesis of it, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, that clouds your ability to make wise decisions for the country. If you don't have a North Star.
Yes.
Your North Star should be what's best for America. Full stop.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
I think part of his North Star is like, what's best for me and what makes me look good.
But that was revealed in his character. And I think that I think that because of political rhetoric and ideology, people overlook character. I can look at Mitt Romney, and I can find a lot that is likable, and I can see a man who ultimately has good character, even if I disagree with him politically on certain points, or there are questionable aspects of how he conducted business at Bain Capital. I can look at that and I can basically look and say, is that a good husband? Is that a good father? Is that a good man? Is that somebody who I could have a civil discourse with, even if we disagree? And he passes those parameters. He passes that test, Tom. I can look at, the late John McCain, and I could make those overtures. I can look at Barack Obama and make those overtures. I can make those overtures about Bernie Sanders. I can make those overtures about Joe Biden. These are people who have lived their life very openly, very publicly, and without doing so in a truly shameful manner. We can make arguments about Bill Clinton on that one. Which I will concede is more on the spectrum of a Donald Trump. But minus the fact that Bill Clinton would practice civility in discourse if you disagree with him, and wouldn't belligerently attack you, lie about you, defame you, so on and so forth, only if you make allegations against him. That being said, I think that the problem with political ideology and zealotry, whether you're on the left or the right, is to diminish people rather than attack their points, their policies, and do so in an accurate and a actionable and articulate way, and present that your issue is not with this person. And I also think grading someone's morality and character on how you feel about their policies is also flawed. I think that, again, we need to separate politics and problems from people, and we need to have tremendous respect and empathy for people as individuals, while we can disagree with their politics, and we can also dismantle and debate their policies. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ironic that I remember several elections ago, there was a presidential race where one of the Republican kind of rallying cries was that character matters.
Mm-hmm.
And another one, I guess when it was McCain, was country first.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how now we have a Republican president for whom character is absolutely suspect. And
That's
whether
being
or
generous.
whether or not
You're all too kind, Tom.
when he's putting the country first is also really questionable.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the approval rating from Republicans is quite strong and steady. And it's really been impressive how he's held on to that base. And so I suspect it'll be, honestly, I wish we had a more charismatic and energetic and articulate candidate on the other side.
I wish that, well, that's why we wanted Andrew Yang, but Andrew Yang was not allowed to do long form content. One of the flaws of the media arm of the Democratic establishment is, one, they are also very blinded in terms of what is practical too, but I wouldn't call them evil. Unfortunately, a lot of the way that the far left part of the party has done has started to morally browbeat people that just, again, differ largely due to, I think, generational divides more than class divides. I think that there are generational divides, and you know this, Tom, as someone who has, older family members, and me, I'm 36, so I'm an old millennial. I'm back when we used to call it Gen Y. I'm an older millennial, but there are generational divides that exist even people with a 10-year gap. You have a massive gap between, say, Hillary Clinton and an AOC, or a Nancy Pelosi and an AOC. And so, but there is something to be said for youth and innovation and optimism, but also there's something to be said for not being tried and seasoned and not having lived through things. There are a lot of people who have never lived through a recession before, Tom, and are being very humbled in what they do and don't understand. And you and I have lived as adults, working adults, through a recession before. We have a lot of wisdom to offer to these young whippersnappers. Back in my day, when we had the crash of 2008, they had all kinds of cockamamie ideas about what to do about it, and ultimately none of them came to pass. Stuff like that, right? So I think Andrew Yang represented a really good middle ground as a young Gen Xer that is very millennial mindset and very forward thinking, and also is capable of activating young millennials and the voting class of Generation Z, and could galvanize them, and also had an understanding and a mastery of social media. I think that part of where the Yang campaign went off the rails was, one, not monetizing and leveraging the Yang Gang, and not prioritizing the scale of social media to activate new voters versus trying to bring over establishment or traditional or conventional voters. I think that we should have just built a broader coalition and activated new blood, and the value and the leverage would have been, we brought the new voters, and you need to decide whether or not you're going to forfeit the next 10 years worth of elections by disenfranchising this group of people. And I think that Yang could have actually outflanked Bernie on that, because of his understanding of social media, and because of the power of the Yang Gang, and because of the social media mavericks and mavens that exist within the Yang Gang, who have been able to build even their own individual fan bases and voting blocks. And I think that going hard and going all in on traditional media and traditional voters, in hindsight, was a mistake. And I think not leveraging digital more, and the digital savvy potential apolitical voter, I think that was where the practicality failed. And I think the Democratic establishment is not practical in the sense that their mission, their idea of what their mission parameters are flawed, and they're not innovative enough because they're too safe. They are too And the reason I think the Bernie wing of the party dislikes them is because they seem to be too conservative for them and too risk adverse for them. But I think that's a generational divide.
So I agree with you to the extent that, Yang's strength was with the younger kind of online segment. I will say that even also for Bernie, that young voting bloc did not deliver or did not come out as, right? Like in Iowa and New Hampshire, it's like, okay, it's great that we're all on Twitter and YouTube, but like, where the heck were the voters?
I think that Iowa and I think that I understand the reason for prioritizing the historical data in Iowa and New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. But I also think that is in the interest of the establishment. And so I think you had to launch an aggressive long-term campaign of disruption that actually, to some extent, and this is blasphemy, but I would have ignored that data in favor of building a new data set to test a new thesis instead of relying on the old one, because I think that we have to look at what the 21st century version of politics is, because you remember, all historical data said Donald Trump had no path to victory. Mm-hmm. It said he wouldn't even be the nominee. I think that should have been the writing on the wall, that the rules have changed. The game has changed. I think people didn't look at it from a social behavioral perspective and look at where the culture exists now. I also think that people are not reading the data points on the tradition to digital media consumption, which we're now seeing clearly with COVID-19, with the amount of time that people are spending online and the fact that our digital infrastructure wasn't even like capable of really truly supporting everybody at the same time recently. Mm-hmm. I think that was underestimated.
So, well, let's say, fast forward to 2024, unless the Democratic Party changes the kind of primary process, mm-hmm. Are you saying, like, had we started with Super Tuesday or started with California or New York State, it would have been a very different outcome for Yang around?
I think where I would have here's a part of where this ties into something like YouTube strategy. Mm-hmm. With YouTube strategy, one of the things that people do that's very smart, and a lot of my clients do, is they look at the analytical data of where their own concentration and base exist. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, they prioritize everything from the timing of the uploads of their videos to the language that they use or the even cultural references they use based on that data. I would have looked at the data of where the strongest concentration of Yang Gang is, and I would have blitzkrieged ads there, because then the conversations would have why am I seeing, and who's this Andrew Yang guy? And then using the social behavior of those conversations, then more of the people in the base would have yanged those people. And those are larger groups and so on and so forth. I also think that doing something that could attract PR, because you need those viral moments. You need to create those moments that people will talk about after the debates. And Yang was doing a decent job of that, but I think there could have been some better things. But I think when you combine that, because one of the things that grew YouTuber Marquez Brownlee was the combination of timing. Every time when he really blew up, he timed everything he did to the release of an Apple product or a Samsung product, mm-hmm. or a new piece of tech, day of he made a piece of content, right? I think that when you use a blitzkrieg ad strategy right on the back of when we saw this data on Andrew Yang being Googled and being searched and so on and so forth. Blitzkrieging digital ads based on search traffic, I think, would have actually given Yang a big leg up. I also think that with the money that was spent in Ohio, the ratio of what you get when you look at buying YouTube ads, Instagram ads, Facebook ads, and everything like that, it's fractions of the cost, and you get real-time data and analytics, Tom, and then you can base off of those. You can refine it, get the ad spend cheaper, but you also have a better understanding of who you do and do not have the attention of, and then you can triple down. And so I would have also done more, and I think one of the things the entire Democratic Party did wrong was we didn't see nearly enough advertising and enough energy behind just raising the overall voting pool and doing recruitment and speaking to new voters and galvanizing people to get out and vote. You did not see nearly as much like rock the vote and get out and vote campaigns and everything like that. So there was too much doubling down on their base. They underestimated how much churn they lost to Trump. They underestimated how much how fragmented the party was and to the degrees. So they didn't analyze any of the social behavior. And the thing is, I think that Yang, given more resources and time, because you remember, part of the issue with the campaign was not having enough resources, right? So you get more donations and resources if there's more awareness and reach. So I think running the ads, growing the email list, doing more UBI trials, getting enough money to be able to do some form of having somebody on UBI through a trial in all 50 states would have made for a great, would have made for fantastic media coverage. But I also think not having the money to get the right political operatives that had experience and only relying on grassroots people, only relying on people's passion, without people who had practical resources and experience and connections to bring to bear for the right collaborative efforts. I think that was a problem. I also think that the celebrities within the Yang Gang weren't utilized enough and weren't supplied with clear objectives and things that they could and should be doing. Because I think that they should have been used for awareness and recruitment a lot more. And that's just my thought.
Yeah, there were definitely
weak ground game.
There were a lot of things that I'm sure the campaign hopefully learned for the next go round. One thing that I do feel was potentially much harder to overcome is just the demographic makeup of Iowa and New Hampshire doesn't lend itself to a candidate who's really strong with young
Which is why I wouldn't have prioritized it. I would have played to your
Yeah.
strengths. What we tell people in YouTube content strategy, what I've even told Yang Gang YouTubers is you play to your strengths. You play to your strengths. You know what Trump doesn't do? Trump doesn't try to appeal to people who don't already like him.
Yeah.
He knows what his base is, and he triples down. He knows what his demographics and psychographics are. He triples down. And he doesn't do that because he's a master strategist. He does that because he's an extroverted character who can read the room and siphons and feeds off that energy. And he knows where his prime real estate, he's a real estate guy. He knows where his prime real estate is. He knows where his prime integral target is. He knows where they're soft, and he hits them over and over and over again because he's, if nothing else, he's an aggressive sales and marketing guy, to his credit.
Yeah. The thing for Yang, then, if you look at where he was having the most absolute and per capita interest, was California, New York, Chicago, like major kind of diverse.
He had some real good traction in the purple states in the South.
Yeah. But then you compare it to where the early primaries were. Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, like that is not Yang country.
Yeah. When people zig, he could have used, he should have hit Georgia harder, especially on the back of Stacey Abrams' loss. He would have been able to galvanize people who wanted change and reform on the back of that. And she's somebody that has good alliances within the Democratic establishment. Making overtures toward her or her people, or at least her supporters, would have probably been very powerful. And then talking with Martin Luther King Jr. the third, Martin Luther King the third, not Jr. Sorry, the third, would have also been very good with regard to galvanizing those people around Georgia and making those overtures toward that base of voters. And that could have given him at least allies and a stronghold in the South to consolidate with what he had in Northeasterners and in the Westerners in California. That would have been a very powerful, I think, leverage point. To your point, Tom, zig when other people zag. Instead of fighting for the fragmented scraps that the Democratic frontrunners were all fighting and going in, like, you know how you win a Royal Rumble? You let all the big name faces and heels destroy each other, and you sit there like in the cut waiting for your opportunity, and then That's when you choke slam somebody from the top rope.
I haven't heard that analogy before. Now, I would say that Bloomberg tried that. He tried to kind of stay out of it and let people duke it out.
Well, he made the
early
mistake of
days.
thinking that money can buy everything.
Right. So what was your you didn't think, I guess he as a candidate was also pretty kind of
He had a
lukewarm.
he thought he made the mistake, and this is the thing that people disdain about elitism. He thought that his money and his power and his resume entitled him to the presidency, and he made the mistake of thinking, do you know what, if he was going to be a serious candidate, in my opinion, Michael Bloomberg should have done, and I'm not donation shaming him because I know that's a thing now in Twitter, like what I would have considered if I were Michael Bloomberg with that, what was it, how much was it, 500 million, 5 billion, what was it?
That he spent?
Yeah, what was it, was it
It's
500
over
million?
a billion.
It was
over a billion.
I think
Yeah.
it was 5 billion. I want to say it's like,
maybe.
let's just say for the sake of argument, it was 5 billion. Tom, what's the math on that divided by 50 states?
50 states. Let's see. If it's a million each, it would be 50 million. If it's a billion each, it would be 50 billion. So it's like 200 million or something like that
Per state?
Yeah.
Okay, so 200 million per state. Do you not think that it would have been cheaper to solve one of the biggest problems and do a 50-state initiative of, I'm literally going to throw money at solving one of the biggest problems in your state, and just combine that with running digital ads about the problem that you solved and buying a couple of damn billboards on the highway? Because it's, how much is it to solve the problems in Flint, Michigan with the water and everything like that? I think you could do it for like, what, a cool 60 million? So it's like, so we're not even breaking 100 million of the money they had. He could have like literally been the hero of Flint, Michigan, and that would have got national attention. Think about it. If he literally just went on a problem solving tour for America and everything, and did a 50-state initiative literally by influxing cash into the problems and saying all of these problems were solvable, and we have Donald Trump who tripled the deficit, promised you $1 trillion infrastructure bill that never manifested, and every single one of these problems were solvable. And I, Michael Bloomberg, as a billionaire who you don't think should exist, single-handedly solved a problem in every single state of America out of my own pocket, and did a better job and outflanked and did more for every one of those states than Donald Trump did in 5 years. I did it in 5 months. See, that would have been the strategy I would have used and deployed if I was just going to try to throw money at becoming president of the United States. It's like, gee, I'll just fix something massive in every single state and then just literally throw up billboards patting myself on the back and run digital ads, and everybody in every one of those states knows exactly who the hell I am and what I did for them. And that's how, even if you're a narcissistic, egotistical, like alleged, like, well, I won't throw out any, like, whatever, you still would probably win people over because they will be able to say, well, he did do that one thing for me or my family or my community lately, and he can't be all bad if he spent this money on it, and oh, I guess billionaires aren't so bad. Like, if you actually literally just decide to be Tony Stark, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, I think that the numbers for the Avengers dictate that we're all down.
Yeah. So let me try and defend Bloomberg. So I just Googled it. He spent about $1 billion, they say.
Okay.
But to your point, like, hey, you could have deployed that to solving big problems. And
even with 500, even if it's 500 million, 50 states,
it's still 10 million a state. So it's 20 million per state. Right.
So it's like problem solved.
I get that. That's serious money. That's serious money. Yeah. However, I mean, we have to cut him a little slack, I think, because he didn't enter till late, because he delayed entering because he thought Biden would be a strong candidate, and then obviously after the first few states, he concluded that Biden would not be strong. And so, like, it's hard to deploy $1 billion in a few months to solve all these problems.
That's why you wouldn't make the decisions yourself unilaterally. You would just appoint a council of people, which is what I've always liked. I know it's a science fiction-y reference, but as a nerd, you'll appreciate this and everything like that. Like, I've always thought we should have literally just have the Science Council of Krypton be a part of our like governing structure. We just have the Science Council, but the difference is we just don't let them be subservient to the Brainiac AI, aka Skynet, and then we're okay. Like, and then I think we're okay. They just don't listen too much to the AI, and we'll avoid the cliff here. But I just think that you literally could have gotten a bunch of really bright people and to figure out what the biggest problems are in each one of these states, and then say, all right, go forth and approach these governors and on my behalf as my representative or my consigliere. He would have shown his ability to delegate, number one. It would have shown his ability to do governance, and it would have shown what he can do with our tax dollars, being he did this out of pocket. It would have really made an argument for his ability to govern properly. Donald Trump has not appointed the smartest, best, and brightest people, which is what people were hoping for when they elected a CEO. It's one of the reasons we actually like Andrew Yang as a businessman, is because he doesn't even believe he's the smartest man in the room all the time, even though he's a strong candidate for being that in most rooms they would walk into. And he's amenable to listening to other people's points of view, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, regardless of whether they're a CEO or a barista. He will entertain the idea that they might know something he doesn't, or at least know something about their experience of life he doesn't, and he's willing to hear how they might approach a problem, even if it's not how he would approach a problem. Michael Bloomberg's ego dictated that his best answer was to just throw the money into himself. That's the best investment he thought he could make, and clearly he was wrong.
Yeah, I think if Bloomberg had decided to run a few years ago, and then had time to deploy that money and deliver results, that would have been amazing. I mean, I just feel like he assumed that Biden was going to be a much stronger candidate earlier. And look, I mean,
it's
now
not an unreasonable assumption, is it?
Yeah, no. I mean, a lot of people thought that Biden would clean up after the first couple of states. So, but here we are. But now, Roberto, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the Yang Gang kind of media creator.
Blackout? The creators in the Yang Gang.
Yeah.
I love the Yang Gang creators. I love Paget Kagi, Problem Solver Politics. Obviously, I love what you're doing. Zach and Matt are doing amazing work all the time. Humanity First YouTube channel. I love his memes. I love his Yang with the laser beam eyes all the time. It's like, yeah.
There's it's a great crew. And I'm curious, as a YouTube sort of a YouTube creator expert, like, how would you grade the job that the Yang Gang creators did this time around? And what advice would you give those who are currently creating content, or maybe in the future will, to kind of do an even better job?
I think that most of the prominent Yang Gang YouTube creators deserve an A to a B on the grade of not what they were able to accomplish for Andrew Yang, but what they were able to accomplish for viewers. Because I think that the way that you should look at a content creator is basically what they do and how they provide value to their viewers, and also how they educate their viewers. And then also in this case, since they're representing the brand of Andrew Yang and his ideas and the Humanity First perspective, how they handle criticism and how they handle differing opinions and so on and so forth. And in that regard, I think that like Paget Kagi gets top marks. Obviously, I love the ability of Problem Solver Politics to pivot from being exclusively a Yang channel to being a very thoughtful commentary of how we think, and also the fact that they entertain multiple points of view, and that they have hosts that themselves are working out and talking through conflicting ideas in a conversational like way, and still can respect each other and still like each other at the end of the day. I like that what Zach and Mac do with their show is they give us the highlights of Andrew Yang, but also a lot of times they will do deconstructions of criticism or misinformation around Andrew Yang. Now, I think there are things that could be improved there, also with respecting other people's points of view, and also making sure that you absolutely go out of your way to frame someone else's arguments correctly, just so that you aren't doing the thing that you are criticizing. And therefore, on a long enough timeline, Tom, we're all hypocrites. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. And sometimes I think that it's a lesson in humility to understand that you will have ideas or thoughts that will conflict with what a future person yourself believes in hindsight, with more experience, more education, or the fact that you are capable yourself of just being misinformed or uninformed. And so I think it's okay on a long enough timeline to accept that, yeah, at some point you're going to be a hypocrite, but it's not the worst thing because it's part of the human experience to be that. Your parents figured that out, and that's why sometimes they're telling you, this is what I understand to be valid now versus I did the same dumb crap you're doing when I was a kid. So it's like, I mean, yeah, of course, all of your parents are hypocrites, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. So I look at things like that. So the curve that I would go to is, how do you serve your community? The accuracy of your information, the enthusiasm you have and bring to the table, and how you handle criticism and how you handle differing opinions and bringing new information and ideas, and can you maintain the Humanity First brand in terms of civility and respect and empathy, and can you do Andrew Yang's ideas and ideals justice in the way you present. And so I think most of the Yang Gang has done a fantastic job with that, whether they're doing it here in YouTube or TikTok or in Twitter, and the way that they engage and debunk people. And I think it is, gold star standard. I don't think that everybody will get it right 100% of the time, and that's okay. And I don't think there's a need to call people out on that because they are human. And I do think that there are also going to be toxic people or bad actors in any group. I do think that it's more prevalent in some groups rather than others. MAGA. But the reality is, I as someone who is a YouTube educator, I'm very proud of what the Yang Gang on YouTube has managed to accomplish, and I'm really proud of how many of them continue to make content, understanding that the campaign ended, but the movement did not, and have embraced the Humanity Forward project. So, yeah.
Yeah. So going forward, I think you've made a great point about being fair and open and kind of even-handed when talking about different points of view. What are some other things that you would advise content creators in the Yang Gang movement to think about as we sort of plan the next few years?
Timeliness matters, but also you have to have clear priorities. And just in general, something I'll give you guys for free that literally is something I only exclusively usually tell my coaching clients is, there are 4 real things that I think of in terms of the internal work of becoming a top tier world-class content creator. Understanding the value of structure, systems, strategy, and support. And what I mean by that, Tom, is this: structure. Really think about your format. Really think about how you present information. Really think about how convenient it is to the viewer and how easy it is to interpret and move through things. Also think about the rituals you build into your stuff to make yourself familiar to people. Look at systems that allow you to be consistent. Most creators, let alone Yang Gang creators, they have other things. They have jobs, they have families. You have to create systems that make it easy for you to be consistent and also be timely, so that you can report on something or comment on something as it's happening, so you have maximum exposure, maximum momentum, and that you feel to the community like you're reliable and you're on top of things. But you have to build systems that allow you to do that quick, fast, and in a hurry, but still accurately and in good enough quality. And then in terms of strategy, you really need to think about where you fit into this entire conversation, what you bring to the table, what you add, and what's your differentiator, how are you different, and what are your strengths, play to your strengths, and also who are your people within the Yang Gang or within the broader spectrum of politics, who will find you relatable, what's your unique perspective. So you have to be strategic, and by strategic, I mean be thoughtful, be mindful. It's like, That's a really important one. And then finally, in terms of support, you need to support the other Yang Gang creators, and not by just, oh, I'm going to or like doing any like sub for sub nonsense. No, 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 no. You support them by actually looking at their content thoughtfully. And if you see something where that can be better, help them. If you find a good deal on camera gear or lighting that would help them, let them know about it. If you have spare gear around and someone says, hey, I want to start something, but I need a good light, or I don't have a lot of budget and everything, you have something spare, help them out, whether it's a loan or a gift, like help them out. If you feel like you want some feedback on your content, consider making a private Facebook group or a Discord server and talk to the other creators in the Yang Gang and build an alliance and say, hey, we're going to help each other figure out thumbnails. We're going to figure out timing. We're going to figure out, our optimization. We're going to collaborate, and we're going to do a series of videos on this thing, and we're all going to put it in playlists together. So I think that really you'll find that a lot of the biggest and top tier creators, they work together, whether overtly or behind the scenes. A lot of them work together. A lot of us share data and information, and not just YouTube educators, and not just people who work with coaches, like people just in their own niche, especially creators who have risen on the come up. They do it collectively, whether they overtly declare that or whether they just behind the scenes are just like, homies and just doing it. So that's important. Top tier creators are thoughtful about everything they do in their process, Tom, and they make the most of what they have with their systems. They work with the time, money, resources, and strengths that they have, and they try as best as they can to be consistent. And they also usually have a structure and something that they have become known for in the way that they present and they deliver. So like, that's what I would tell people. I also think in terms of priorities, I think that you have to be committed not just to Andrew Yang, the man, but the thoughtfulness behind his ideas and the intention of, we need to help everybody and not just people we agree with. And so I think part of that is, I would encourage anyone watching this, even if you are a Bernie Sanders supporter, I want you to consider putting aside ideology for a moment in favor of practicality and asking yourself if you are willing to accept the pain and suffering of your fellow human beings over the next few years as a consequence of allowing poor leadership and negligence, dereliction of duty, and self-interest to be our standard of governance in this country? Or even are you willing to accept someone less palatable to your personal preference or choice? Mine being Andrew Yang, yours might be Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or even Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar. Like, whoever your preference is, you have to ask yourself, do you honestly believe that there's anybody who is more disinterested in the welfare of the average American, the people that aren't part of his base, than Donald J. Trump? And you have to ask yourself if you're willing to let other people live, not just you, other people live with the consequences of his governance. And understand that, 2014 is right there afterward. And there's a such thing as the momentum and the pendulum swing of us walking back from the cliff, and we might be able to de-radicalize the country. I know that people don't like the status quo, but I think for anyone who's been experiencing added tension in this country, they can remember that before Donald J. Trump, as much as you may not have loved the status quo, you probably had a lot less anxiety. And wouldn't a lot less anxiety be a really good starting point? It's not ideal, but isn't that better than just dealing with compounding the problem that someone will inevitably have to solve? I mean, how big of a mess do we want to clean up when the time comes? Do we really want more deregulation of the EPA? Do we really want the environment to get worse? Do we really want more destruction of our national parks and them to be sold off? Do we really want more fracking? Do we really want those things? Do we really want more of this man's appointments to the Supreme Court and to the federal courts to be able to rubber stamp whatever whim takes his fancy? Do we really want more defunding of essential things like the CDC to make us even more vulnerable to things like COVID-19? How much more devastation do we really want to put on the table here to be anti-establishment, or because we didn't get our top tier choice? We have to really look at what is a practical thing that we can do. It may not solve our problems, but do we want our problems to be exacerbated just so that we can say, I told you so?
Amen, brother. Amen. I buy that line of argument, and that's for sure why I'll be voting blue. But let me do this, Roberto. Let's take some audience questions.
Down, totally down.
So, folks, go ahead and type them in the chat box, and I'll try and pick out some. And while we're waiting for the initial questions to come in, I have to ask you, Roberto, a follow-up on the advice for Yang Gang creators. Like, I can't have you on the Nerds for Humanity show and not ask for advice about the Nerds for Humanity channel. Like, what advice would you give me?
Actually, Tom, let's just actually take a look at your channel.
Oh boy, exciting!
Like,
we're gonna get a free channel audit.
Yeah, let's do it. And I'm gonna, like, when I pop up your screen here, I'm just gonna make sure that, like, you don't have autoplay and we mute and all those things. So I'm gonna pop up this with the screen share.
Yep.
Let's see here. Chrome tab, Nerds for Humanity. All right, and you should be able to pop that up on the screen with us on the side here with StreamYard. Love StreamYard so much. So cool. Clutch tool. All right, so you know I'm all about that dark mode. All right, so yeah, we got to be all about that dark mode, the powers of the dark side. For guys who don't know, I'm a big old nerd. I'm a Star Wars nerd, so I'm like always sitting here, imitating Yoda I am. You know, like, so...
I think we picked that up about 5 minutes into this interview.
Yeah, probably. There's a lot. So one of the first things I would say, Tom, is you need a stronger overall thumbnail strategy. Consider looking at what Paget Kagi has been doing with just using a very good snapshot. Or you could use conceptual thumbnails, meaning it can be about the idea, or you can do what Problem Solver Politics is doing, where you put Andrew Yang or another politician that you might be discussing, or your guest, and then you have the text with large text that's on the left-hand side so that the YouTube timestamp doesn't cover it up. And so for the casual viewer to click on that, they'll understand the context, they'll understand what's going on, and even if they're not familiar with you, they're familiar with the subject matter. So I would prioritize the subject matter for the click-through rate, or the individual might be the lead-in. And that is what would attract either their audience or people who would care about that. Let's also look at your most popular videos, because that's an indicator of what you're known for. So these interviews you would have with Andrew Yang, I would consider getting cutouts of Andrew Yang and making the thumbnails more prominent and feature Yang's face and get the name in there, maybe even use the color scheme. I also would consider, to stand out, I love what you have with your top banner. And that was really good and that was really slick. You should take approaches like that to your thumbnails. Even if you're going to be the face and you are going to be recognized, you should really use that kind of same strategy with taking some very thoughtful poses. You're a thoughtful, data-driven guy, Tom. You should take a lot of thumbnail poses and cut them out in advance of you having thoughtful poses like this, frustrated ones like this, or like this. You should really do that. If you want simplified, great thumbnails, look at a YouTuber, Graham Stephan. He blew up recently and he is killing it in the entrepreneur space. And he's also one of the most thoughtful content creators on YouTube. He's almost at 2 million subscribers. And he started 3 years ago and was getting like no views and no traction talking about real estate and personal finance. Those things are very thoughtful in nature to talk about. You are very thoughtful in nature. I think that if you do some very clever thumbnail poses and you take advantage of the expression range of your face, that entices us to click. And I think you can pull it off, Tom. I also think that sometimes in the thumbnail, having the most interesting data nugget that you can communicate in 2 or 3 words in text on the thumbnail with your face and expression, either contrasting that or complementing that, will increase your click-through rate. Secret to YouTube, everybody, is get people to click on a video, get people to watch as much of that video as possible, and then get them to watch more videos and subscribe to your channel. That's literally the YouTube algorithm simplified for any small YouTuber. It's more nuanced and complicated than that, but if you accomplish those 3 things, Mr. Beast told me to my face, and he told all of us at Vid Summit that literally that's all he cares about. All he looks at is getting his click-through rate as high as possible by changing the title and thumbnail. If he has to change it 7 times, he'll do it to get as many clicks as he possibly can. Make the video as informative and entertaining, or whatever the goal of the video is, to get people to watch as much as possible, and then just move them along to another video. Your stuff is deep dives. I think that strategically speaking, you need to look at the issues that are either the most contentious within the political spectrum, or within the Yang Gang, or within the Democratic Party or progressive wing, and you need to then bring some interesting title that either makes us curious or makes us want to either validate our point or attack your points, and then hit us with that good data. Hit us with that good, Tom. Hit us with that good. And then, even if we disagree with you, we have to go, well, I respect the thoroughness. I respect the data. And so I think that the other thing I tell YouTubers is you got to become known for something. I think that by getting early into video, into some really good chart or graph or animated thing that someone else can use, especially in political Reddit or Twitter, to make their arguments, you win if in the first 3 minutes of a video, or even the first 2 minutes of video, there's a statistic or a graph that someone can use to frame their arguments, because from a social behavior standpoint, that's political wonk's favorite thing to do. A political wonk or a policy wonk's favorite thing to do is to have some graphic that they can use to argue their points. So if you present that, you the man.
I love it. Thank you, Roberto. That's it's amazing advice, and I totally agree. Like the thumbnail stuff, it's like, it's late at night and you just finished the damn video and you just want to get it out there. But I have to spend more time on those thumbnails. I agree. It's especially when I see other people's, I'm like, wow, there's a big difference. All right, let's get into some audience questions, and thanks again for the advice.
Super. And I've got time for you, Tom. I'll take as many questions as people want to throw.
All right. Well, Nancy wants to know, hey, how come she's just hearing about you now? Like, you have these great thoughts, have this great expertise. Was that kind of like a explicit decision you made to kind of be behind the scenes, or were you just too busy?
It's one of those things to where, in many cases, I understand that sometimes style can overrule substance, and like I said earlier, I think ideology overrules practicality, because human beings are emotionally driven first, and then we rationalize everything off of what we emotionally are compelled to do, for the most part, and most people. That's just broad group dynamics. I want to be a resource, Tom, because one of the things that I genuinely believe in terms of what attracted me to Andrew Yang is I believe that people need to be empowered economically, and there are multiple means and ways of doing that. For me, I was someone who just 7-8 years ago was working class. I worked for an employer, and no matter what my contribution was, I couldn't scale my income. I also couldn't control my time, the energy of where I put my energy. It was dictated by somebody else. I needed leverage. A controversial figure, and a lot of people that are left-leaning don't like him, but I think there's likable things about him, or at least explore his ideas a little bit, is Dr. Jordan Peterson. And I liked this quote from him that really I think is powerful no matter where you lean politically. If you cannot negotiate, you are a slave. And in my case, as an employee, I knew that I had no control over when I wake up or go to bed, because it's dictated by when I have to be to work. So my time was leveraged. I had no control over my energy, because they were going to dictate where my energy was spent, and I wasn't going to have ownership and autonomy of my ideas. So even the process by which I do my work was going to be dictated by somebody else. And then I had no real control over my income, because they had the leverage to offer something, and I had to say yes or no. And I didn't have a lot to work with there. So for me, I then became a freelancer and then an entrepreneur. That was the path that I took because before the Industrial Revolution, and Andrew Yang talks about these things, every single one of us was a direct-to-consumer type entity. You were the local tailor, the local farmer, the local blacksmith, the local whatever. And so your contributions to your community directly impacted your ability to sustain yourself and vice versa. And in the world of digital, with all these systems, whether it's YouTube or Shopify or all these things, it occurred to me that most people don't realize that if they remove the appliance of the middleman of a job, which is just the most convenient way to make an income, is that you don't need a job so much as you need an income source. UBI was fascinating to me because it gives people an income source that's not predicated on how much time or labor they are capable of contributing, and gives them a baseline to work with. And then some form of universal basic healthcare would mean that their healthcare was not going to be leveraged by their tie to an employer. And then if we do something about, at least if nothing else, trade schools, but I want some form of taxpayer funded education as was had before the Reagan administration in terms of state schools, or at least something where your first 2 or 4 years of education could be taxpayer funded, and then any additional could be after that, what have you. The reason I wanted those was for the purposes of economic mobility, because if you have an income that's not tied to your employer knows that when negotiating with you. If you can leave any job and skill up and retask yourself to deploy in another industry or field or career, you have leverage and bargaining power there. And if your health isn't going to be compromised because you're out of work, then you have the means of always being able to contribute your value because your health is assured or guaranteed. And so by ensuring those 3 things for people, they have economic leverage to do whatever they need to increase and monetize their own individual potential. If you can do those things, if you're not worried about those things, you can make your maximum contribution to a society and you can have leverage. If that's not going to happen from a policy and from a government, then I want to be someone who can educate people to be able to do that, hopefully in the way that I did, if they're capable. I lose the ability for people to accept that from me if they stylistically are turned off by what they believe my political ideology to be.
Got it.
So I lose leverage to help people if they immediately throw me into a category that makes me persona non grata to them.
Well, hopefully you could volunteer as a Yang Gang creator coach for.
I'm down.
Right? For some of those content producers who need a second opinion. And, I agree with you. There's probably more kind of collaboration even between the Yang Gang creators. And there's been great stuff already, but probably could even be more.
I think they could do more, but I think timeliness, Tom, is one of the biggest variables in growth as a content creator. And I think that you've seen it yourself, that people who, without worrying about monetization or waiting to catch up on that, who did capitalize on anything related to our current crisis and were able to get attention and then determine where attention would go. And it's attention is this massive commodity that's underrated, and attention is predicated on timing. So I'm like willing to take again any of these questions related to that.
Great. Let me just move on to the next one. You are in, did you say you're in Atlanta or you're in Georgia?
Yes, I'm in Atlanta. Yeah.
So do you have a preference for Ms. Abrams or any particular?
No, and nothing against her. I think that she is stronger not being a VP candidate. I also think that Andrew might be stronger not being a VP as well. I think that Biden does need a VP that could galvanize the party beyond Orange Man bad. And I think that little joke there for anybody, but the because I think it's a valid criticism that he doesn't have an excited youth voter base. Trump has an excited base, so you need someone who can counterpunch to that. You also need someone who immediately, if we want to talk about Biden's unfortunate situation, look, I think it's cruel that we keep electing senior citizens, and I think there should be a manual retirement from politics at age 65, just because I think it's cruel to keep putting senior citizens in the stressful position of governance and I also think it's not in our own interest to keep electing people who probably may not have to live with the consequences of their governance anyway. So I think the skin in the game is an issue. So I would prefer a younger VP. I know he made a promise for it to be a female candidate. I don't know if that's in the best interest of those candidates to tie their brand to Joe Biden. So I would, I don't know who is an appropriate choice where it's in their best interest, in the country's best interest, and in the interest of beating Donald Trump. I think that's hard shoes to fill. And I haven't figured out an equation where that person works. I mean, you could argue a fantasy ticket might be a Tulsi Gabbard, because if anything, God forbid, should happen to Mr. Biden, Tulsi's our president, and then that opens up many interesting possibilities. But so from a fantasy standpoint, sure, Tulsi Gabbard is VP, and I think she'd do a great job. And I think the country could use strong leadership either in a VP or a president that has a military background and has served, because I think that, we've foregone that far too long, and I think it's to our detriment. And I don't think our current leadership has a healthy enough respect for men and women in uniform, or for our national security advisors, or for the sacrifices of military families. We have a president who has attacked military families because he's too thin-skinned to be the bigger person. So I am for somebody, even though I know there are people who disagree, and that's fine, I'm for somebody who at least has military experience and understands the price that is paid by military service members and their families. So,
right on. All right.
Sorry for the long-winded answers. I'm just trying to be thoughtful.
No, they're great. Someone wants to know. So Mick wants to know: had Yang Gang creators come to you in the past for advice?
Just a nugget every now and again. And I don't want to name anybody or call anybody out, but I try to be helpful to any creator, whether they're Yang Gang, I've talked to creators even who are more moderate or libertarian, a few very thoughtful fiscal conservatives rather than social conservatives. So and I think Tom just had either a glitch or something, so I'll just carry the stream. I try to be helpful to any content creator who reaches out to me, as long as I believe that they are a good person. I try to be as helpful as I can.
Right on.
I've refused to help a few content creators politely. I've turned down working with some people that, not for any political reasons, but just because they, for my purview, don't necessarily have a really good head on their shoulders, or maybe the best judgment, for lack of a better phrasing.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that makes it. Is the internet, and there's a lot of all kinds of folks out there. Someone wants to know, what's your Twitter? How can they get to know you better?
It's at Roberto Blake. And you will find that I mostly am answering people's questions. I do stream of consciousness thoughts, whatever I'm thinking at the time, not unlike our boy Andrew Yang, and that you will occasionally see nerd references all over the place, usually in the form of Star Wars, Marvel, or anime. So there's that.
Right on. Brian,
all about that nerd life over here.
Brian was asking this before. Have you watched or heard of this documentary, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick?
No, right now my Netflix consumption has been my 5th watching of Breaking Bad and catching up on Better Call Saul. But I am not in favor of the rhetoric around demonizing the rich, eating the rich, guillotining the rich. I don't like, and not just because I actually aspire to wealth, but because I believe that we should separate our moral ideology around money, and we should view money as a tool, Tom. Money is a tool in the same way that anything else is a tool. It's the argument that I see a lot of Second Amendment issue voters make, for example, but it's also a matter of how people even use these social media platforms. Social media isn't bad or good. I've heard people demonize technology and social media. Technology has been a boon to people during this current crisis of helping them stay in touch with their families, helping them be informed, helping them emotionally support each other. Social media can be a tool that a narcissistic person can make distasteful, or it can be something that someone uses to the benefit of many people with emotional support or philanthropy. And I think that we have to separate morality from money and recognize that it's a tool and it's about how we utilize it. And I don't think we should demonize people for also how they choose to use their tools for their own enrichment, so much as we should look at the whole perspective of what they have doesn't actually have anything to do with what we have, Tom. And I know a lot of people disagree with that, but I think that that's also the great argument to be made for UBI, because I think that when people themselves have separated their time and their energy and their labor for their money, because I had to do this, by the way, I came to, because I think that I otherwise might be more ideological and less rational if I still were in my darkest places and in my pain that came from when I was very economically disadvantaged. You know, there was a long period, I was longer in that mindset and in that pain of my life than I've been successful, much longer. 2/3 of my life or more was struggling in that area. So I have a great amount of empathy and sympathy for that, but I also know that pain blinds us. And pain also, in our own pain and hardship and insecurity, becomes projected onto other people that we otherize in order to despise and to empower ourselves by projecting our problems onto them. And I've seen that even in people who have attacked me in the past. I see that in racial rhetoric, especially. And I think that it can be very polarizing and dismissive. And it's not just bad for the people that you do it to, but it's bad for you as a person, because it diminishes your ability to be empathetic, and it diminishes your ability to see the value that somebody has as an individual. And it's why I love Andrew's message of humanity first, and why he wants to separate human value and economic value. And I think demonizing and making people morally inferior on the preface of what you perceive to be their wealth or privilege without even having a conversation with them as a human being is judgment without context. It's criticism without context. And it's a very shallow way to think. And I think it comes from a scarcity mindset, but I also understand it comes from pain, Tom. It comes from pain. People who bullied me in high school usually weren't having great lives themselves at home. You know, people who people who have attacked or racially profiled me, they weren't exactly living high on the hog, and they weren't exactly in an abundant situation themselves. So I understand that when you see somebody who has so much, it's easy to demonize them and feel that they're at fault for why you have so little. But I think we need to attack problems and not people. And I'm very curious as to whether this documentary takes that same approach and thesis, because what I believe is in economic empowerment, and that what we need to do is we don't need to say, oh, billionaires shouldn't exist. We just need to create more economic mobility that addresses the problem of human suffering, because I don't buy into the thesis that all of our problems are a result of billionaires. Our problems are rooted in our failure to address how human beings actually operate at scale, and our refusal to look at the data behind socioeconomic conditions and to truly separate the morality from the money. Because what no one talks about is the fact that we have circumstances that predispose people toward criminality as a viable option for their problems. UBI addresses that. It's very easy to say, the consequences of criminality are bad, but you know what? I have a financial incentive to just not be in jail. And the thing is, from a policy standpoint, when you talk to conservative voters and I tell them that, and we talk about how can we afford UBI, I go, did you know that for non-violent drug offenders who literally get caught with a few ounces of weed, that it's $30,000 to $50,000 per year of your taxpayer dollars? And that if you extrapolate that out to how many people for non-violent drug-related crime are incarcerated in your state, this is the data point, and this is how many hundreds of millions of dollars that is in your tax dollars that could have been allocated to any problem that you want to solve in your local community. The money exists, but it's been squandered on giving a petty drug dealer on the corner 3 hots and a cot, and they go, that can't be real. And then we sit let's look at the data, and they go, oh dear Lord in heaven. And all of a sudden they move to wanting legalization. And all of a sudden they realize, universal basic income is completely viable if we're literally spending $30,000 to $50,000 a year on housing, feeding, and clothing criminals that literally just had a dime bag. Yeah, we can give people $1,200 a month. Yeah, we can lower my tax situation here. Yeah, we can do all of these things because clearly we've squandered the money on BS. Like to Yang's point, the money's there. So again, I'll watch this documentary, I'll look into it, but the framing of it probably is why I haven't watched it up until now, because I think to sit there and say everything is a rich man's trick is to ignore the larger point that no one can trick you if you are in a position where they don't know something dramatically different than what you know. And if they don't know where your point of leverage is, it's a lot harder for you to trick. I read a book, and the thing is, anybody can be tricked, but it's usually going to be because of your belief system. I read a great book that's a fantasy novel called The Wizard's First Rule. And the Wizard's First Rule is, I quote, people are stupid. The rule is expanded to say people are stupid. Anyone given the right incentive will believe anything because they either are afraid that it is true or they desperately want to believe that it is. Anyone can be leveraged by their hope or their fear, and no one, even a wizard, is immune to this rule. And so that is the trick, isn't it? Donald Trump's Make America Great Again is a superimposition of whatever you want to believe that means. Whatever time period was great for you, you can superimpose that value, and thus you can be tricked. Whoever Donald Trump says is the source of your problems, if you want someone to be angry at, if you want to desperately believe that you're not the reason that your circumstances are this or that, if you want to believe that someone else is at fault, you can use the argument of Donald Trump or Make America Great Again to superimpose an opponent, an adversary, an enemy that you can justify anger or vitriol or hatred toward because they're the source of your problems. Because it'd be great to believe someone else is the source of your problems instead of have accountability and look at the mirror and tell yourself, if there's anything I can do in my life to better myself and to do better for the people in my life, that I have a responsibility to do that thing today and make it a priority. That's very difficult to do, Tom. And it's very difficult to do if you're in pain. What's easy to do when you're in pain is say that I wouldn't be in pain if this thing that I don't have control over were different, instead of I would be in less pain if this thing I am in control of were different.
Well, speaking of pain and how sometimes people who act in a negative way towards others are sometimes acting out of their own personal pain. I was struck a few days ago by, have you seen that TikTok video that came out of Georgia with the high school students? And basically, for people who aren't familiar, it was a video where they were making a whole bunch of racial
stereotypes around black people. So, yeah.
And it starts with the N-word. So it's really kind of
off to a fantastic start. Yeah.
And then just piles onto it. And I was quite surprised, to be honest. Not that this kind of thinking is out there in the world. I'm not that naive. But I was surprised
that it's around young people, though. Like,
yes. These are high school students. And you would think, wow, it's 2020. And then they upload it to the internet.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of struck, like, what's going on in Georgia? Do you think these are just anomalous, like the two like highly racist kids, or I was just shocked at it.
So what people don't understand about ideology is that there are pocket cultures of anything and everything that, while at scale may not represent a large percentage of the population, are still a significant group of people. And that, as long as there are a group of people who believe something, they will always have a means of recruiting or attracting 5 more people, usually very casually, not because they're gung-ho about something, but because I want to fit in with you, or I'm into you, or I'm attracted to you, or whatever, and whatever. Oh, that seems like we don't really mean that. We're having a goof or something like that. But then, no, we kind of do mean it. There's entire communities and swaths in Reddit and 4chan and 8chan that we can see are literally breeding grounds for the most horrible people in the world. And because they're disenfranchised from acting in that way anywhere else in society, they take refuge in the dark corners of the internet. Now, there's also a naivety to youth wherein not everyone is satisfied with that and believes that, as you know, young people believe they're invincible. And there's the such thing as doing anything for clout these days. And so I think that this particular thing is an anomaly. But I think that from a purely like cultural standpoint, there is a pocket culture of young people that think that this is okay, not even because they really deeply believe these things, but they don't deeply believe that these things are offensive, and they think that everything is a joke, and they have maybe a more vicious or nihilistic spectrum of humor. And so I think that that's really the issue of you have a culture of young people who have no historical experience with the things that they're talking about. So there's naivete there. They also have no framework for understanding consequences because, let's face it, in this particular situation, these are probably young people who have never really had to face any serious consequences in their life. I don't know them and I'm speculating, but my understanding is that that's a reasonable deduction that I could make, if not an outright assumption. I just put money on it that I'm right, but that's also maybe my ego. But but I say that to say this, Tom, to wrap that part up, is I think the combination of a culture where, especially like in TikTok, you have the appeal of infamy at scale instantaneously for being offensive in particular. Like, if you can't be talented, if you can't be clever, if you can't be attractive, be offensive is easy attention. So lowest common denominator right there. And we know it. We see it in YouTube all the time. Even in the political spectrum of YouTube, people go for shock and awe. Easy attention. And then you combine that with being young and naive and not having the proper empathy mechanism or the experience or the exposure to realize the damage or harm that you can do. And then potentially an individual who may not have had any real consequences for their actions up until now. And you have a disaster. You have a melting pot for disaster. And I think we will see more of that in the days and weeks to come, especially because people are bored AF.
Well, hopefully we won't see too much of it. I was still flabbergasted when I saw that. I was just like, I cannot believe this is 2020. These are young kids, and they're putting this out there for the world to see. Like, what were they thinking? But
it's one of those things. Like, if you literally. Like, it's one of those things that I think this has to be stated. I think that it speaks to the cultural bubble that some people do choose to still live in, because I find it very hard to imagine that either of them could have a black friend and make that video and post it. And it's not like this was posted to like a private Facebook group or a private anything. This was, I'm going to upload this to everybody that wants to see it. Or maybe it's the naivete of saying, oh, no one follows me and everything. This will be a goof for my 10 followers. Like, but that's still stupid.
Yeah.
Because they're young enough to know videos go viral.
You would think. I would, like, if that same content, I would not have been surprised if like someone were recorded saying that stuff.
That would have been more...
Then be like,
but they went through the effort and thoughtfulness, Tom, of a whole bit.
I know.
They went through a whole
cut the paper
bit.
Out and they
storyboarded this.
They
storyboarded it. Granted, it was still horribly filmed. The lighting was trash, and the writing, the penmanship was horrible and everything like that. So they're not going to get top marks for me, content aside, just off of production value.
Yeah. All right. So Laura, who's also a member of this channel. By the way, I should say hi to Emily, who was our first member, who says hello. Okay, but Laura is saying this is a kind of cool question. If you had to pair Trump and Biden with a YouTuber for like a big time collab, what would that pairing be, and what would the video premise be about?
I would want to pair President Donald Trump with Ben Shapiro, and I want Ben Shapiro to come at him, and I want him to push him on a lot of things because Ben Shapiro may be right leaning, but Ben Shapiro had a background in law, and I think he can deconstruct arguments very well. He's capable of being aggressive when he wants to. He's capable of being civil when he wants to, and he's also capable of twisting the knife as hard as possible, and I would be really curious to see that. And I also am very curious about what the fallout would be for both of the individuals in that, and whether they walk away better or worse from the interaction, both as personalities and as people. But I think that Ben Shapiro is the exact person on the right to hold Donald Trump to some level of account if he's willing to actually go in on him. If he's willing to, and I think he would be to some extent. I think that he is someone who has dissatisfaction with him, but couldn't be brought over by anybody except maybe an Andrew Yang, who he, of course, is quoted as saying is the most charming person in politics. And I think Ben is enough of an ideas guy, even though Ben is ideological and Joe Rogan has hit him on the things where he's ideological. Ben, I think, is a good foil to Trump because Ben is as close to somebody within his ideological spectrum as you can get to a rational and thoughtful actor. Even if you disagree with him, you have to, I think, give him that credit. And believe me, there's a lot that I disagree with Ben on, but I do have a healthy respect for him, especially as a commentator and especially as a debater, because he understands that winning a debate isn't about being right; it's about being perceived to be right. And so I'd want to see him aggressively interview or interact directly with Donald Trump where there's no escape hatch and where there's an hour on the clock, or even better, give it 3 or 4 hours like Joe Rogan, or even let Joe moderate that. I'm good. I'll bring the popcorn, I'll bring the snacks, I'll round up the chairs and everything like that. I'll rent out an arena. We'll do it big. So that's my dream for that one. Joe Biden. I'm tempted with Joe Biden going on Joe Rogan or H3H3.
Yeah, and I worry if he would hold up well in an extended Rogan interview.
Rogan is a compassionate enough and thoughtful person. He's been critical of Joe Biden, but everyone's ignoring that he's also being compassionate just about look at what this guy, because he would speak to and he would understand, look at the tragedy of the loss of his son, and he would be thoughtful there. Look at the health situation. I think that Joe has an appreciation of the fact of maybe we stop running senior citizens.
Yeah.
I know he supported Bernie. He liked Tulsi and Yang.
I don't think Joe.
Yeah.
I don't think Joe would go after. I don't think Rogan would go after Biden in an unfair way. Mm-hmm. I just think a 3-hour extended conversation is taxing.
Is a lot.
Yeah,
I agree.
And
Trump is more physically robust.
Right.
Trump is more physically robust, but I think he's younger than Biden. I don't think in 5 years Trump is as physically robust, which is also the other problem with giving Trump 4 more years. But then but the thing with Biden is if you give Biden 4 more years, he's going to have, in my opinion, a younger VP. So there's, as tragic as that is to think of a human being in that way, strategically I have to consider it because that's the nature of the job. With Trump, you know that you're going to Mike Pence. There's nothing really to look forward to there. So so you see what I'm saying about the strategic value of thinking this through so I think that's where I'm at with this. And yeah, to answer the question though, I think Joe and Joe is interesting. But I do worry for, how will he hold up there? And is that again, we're talking about if nothing else, for my personal amusement, not to forward their campaigns.
Yeah. If I were Biden's campaign manager, I don't know if I would encourage him to do that one. But I think Ethan would probably be a little more laid back. But yeah, either of those I would set the reminders for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I'd really tune into the Trump Shapiro show very quickly with great enthusiasm.
You don't think Shapiro would be tempted to just sort of throw a bunch of softballs? You think he would have a really thoughtful.
He didn't
kind of-
softball Yang, and he ended up being won over by him. Brian is saying Shapiro was destroyed by Yang. I don't think that there was anyone was destroyed. I feel that Ben Shapiro was thoughtful in his concerns, and I think he's sincere in in the fact that he is concerned about certain things. And I think Yang wasn't dismissive of his concerns. And I think that one of the problems in our political spectrum is that people are dismissive of other people's concerns versus explaining why they have an answer for them and proposing that answer in earnest and asking someone, hey, help me pick apart my answer to make my answer better and stronger and healthier and more viable. And I'm willing to do the same for you, even if I disagree. I'm willing to show you where I feel the flaws exist. And I'm not just going to make it up because I dislike that thing or I'm mad. I'm going to tell you how it impacts or affects me or someone in my situation and ask you, can you make it better for me? And you either have a legitimate answer for that, or you have to tell me, I haven't. I'm going to think about that because I do care about you as a person and I wouldn't want you to suffer. And so that's where, again, we have to ask ourselves if people are acting in good faith. And we have to be willing to accept that people may be acting in good faith, but they haven't considered or been thoughtful of our point of view because they haven't been exposed to our point of view in a way that's not dismissive or trying to take a moral high ground or to browbeat them or to be dismissive of their concerns.
Well, Roberto, it has been a great pleasure to have you on the show, and I will absolutely invite you back for sure if you'll accept the invitation in a few months.
Dude, it's been great. I love talking to you. There's other things I definitely on the back end want to talk to you about. I definitely have some other ideas for your channel that we can discuss, offline. But I really just love the community around the Yang Gang and around Humanity Forward. Andrew Yang was my ideal candidate. I think that I love the interviews you've done with him, and I love how open he's been to doing interviews and being a part of the community and not holding himself separate from the people he wants to govern. And I think that that is the difference between him and many other people. I think that's also something we all liked about Tulsi, is that in Yang and Tulsi, we had people who were part of, not apart from. And I continue to believe and see the evidence of that in Andrew Yang, and I'm very hopeful for what the Humanity Forward movement can do and Andrew Yang's political future and the political future of all candidates running on UBI and ranked choice and on the Humanity Forward platform. And just looking forward to it in any way that I can help or contribute. Happy to do it.
Well, Roberto, I think you'll be an important part of the movement for sure, and you've already been. And so thank you so much for spending time with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And volunteering to pitch in the future. I think it's one of those things where if we all do our part, like we can make some history. It may not happen overnight, but the journey starts now, right?
Yeah, journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I just think that, my slogan is create something awesome today. It's also the name of, just minor plug, it's the name of my podcast. We're getting ready to do season 3. Would probably love to have you actually on the podcast at some point to talk about just your own journey as a creator. And I think that the thing that I will leave everybody here with is something I mentioned earlier in the program. Anything you can do to better yourself or the lives of everyone that you interact with, you have an obligation to do that. And I'm sure there's something you can do every single day that betters you. And I'm sure there's something you can do every single day that betters the lives of people around you. So make that a priority and do that. Or as I like to say, create something awesome today.
Amen, Roberto. Let's all do it. I think you and I created something a little special just today, right? I think I got my quota for awesomeness done for this date, and tomorrow we'll do some more.
Yeah. No, I think you do a wonderful job here, Tom, and I really appreciate everything you do.
All right. Well, with that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.